Let me introduce, or reintroduce, Rabbi Edward Feinstein from the Valley Beth Shalom Synagogue, who will speak to us for a few moments concerning stories that hurt and stories that heal. Rabbi Feinstein.
Good morning. There's a wonderful ancient sage who put forth the idea that it's entirely possible for a person on one side of the world to have a problem and not know that there's a person on the other side of the world who owns their solution, which means there's somebody in this room who has the answer to the question you came with today. And the most valuable thing you can do at this conference, even more valuable than listening to speeches and picking up literature, is to find that person, shake their hand, tap their brain, listen to their wisdom, and gain their support. That's the most valuable thing that can happen. So I'm going to ask you to do something real dangerous, but I know that all of you are therapists, so you're good at this. I want you to stand up, turn around, and greet the people sitting behind you. Go ahead. Everybody up, turn around. Okay, good. Please come sit down. Now your homework is to go home tonight with the phone number or email of 2 colleagues you just discovered. And that means that when you have a particularly bad day in your clinic or in your session or in your church or in your place, you can call somebody and say, "You'll never guess what happened to me today." And what's inevitably going to happen is that person's going to say, "Oh, I can top that," and tell you a worse story, and you'll say, "Yeah, yours is worse. Thanks, I feel better." And that, my friends, is called psychotherapy. Thank you for having me to this conference. It is an honor to stand before you and to share a few thoughts. I want to first begin by acknowledging our friend and teacher and sage, Reverend Cecil B. Murray, who is a treasure to this community. And it is always a privilege. He had to go off to another meeting, but it's a privilege to share words with him. And I fear that much of what I'm going to say he said already and probably better, so I'll ask his forgiveness and your indulgence. The other thing I think is important is even though we come from different faith communities and different parts of the community, we all share a common prayer. So bow your heads and pray for the Lakers tonight. That Andrew Bynum should not collect 5 fouls in the first 5 minutes. That Lamar Odom's back is healed and well. That Fish can shoot anything. Right? And that Kobe, God bless him, is Kobe. Amen. In the synagogue where I work, we have a K-6 day school. And we have chapel a couple times a week, and it's my responsibility as the senior rabbi, the pastor of the community, to lead the kids' chapel. So on Tuesdays, we learn new prayers, and on Wednesdays, we play a game after prayers. I like to call the game spiritual inquiry. The kids like to call it Stump the Rabbi. And the game is that you're permitted to ask the rabbi any question you want to ask, any question at all. And usually I can think of an answer or I can make one up that can intimidate a 4th grader. And that's the conversation. And when you give kids the opportunity to ask good questions, they do. A second grader will ask, if God created everything, who created God? It's a very good question, because what he's talking about is eternity. If God doesn't have a beginning or an end, what does it mean to be? Another kid will say, we're learning Bible, we're learning Scripture, and in the first chapters of the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve, the parents of all humanity, said, but Rabbi, Adam and Eve only had 2 kids, and they were both boys. How'd the world get full of people? To which the 5th grade, who just had sex education, screw up their faces and go, ew, you know. And so we get to talk a little bit about literal and non-literal meanings of Scripture, how to interpret Scripture. Sometimes there's a deeply serious question. A little girl in the 4th grade will raise her hand and say, my mommy was just diagnosed with breast cancer. If I pray real hard, will God make her better? That's a terrifying question. That's a painful question. And I say to the child, you know, I'm a cancer patient too. I've had 2 very serious bouts of colon cancer. And when I had cancer, I discovered that the world is full of angels. Angels aren't these guys with halos and harps and wings. Angels are ordinary people who do extraordinary acts of goodness without being asked and without asking for recognition. And I discovered in the doctors and the nurses and the technicians who cared for me, in the friends in my community, in the people who came to lift me up and lift up my family, I discovered that the world is full of angels. So let's pray that your mother finds angels and that they lift her up too and make her well. And I'm confident that God will grant that prayer. And every year when I play this game, every single year for 20-something years now, there is a guy in the 4th grade, a little kid in the 4th or the 5th grade. He wears a different face every year, but he shows up in my chapel. And he's waving his hands crazy, trying to get my attention. And finally I say, okay, stand up. And he checks with his buddies on his row, and he gives me that big grin. He says, okay, Rabbi, any question, right? Sure, any question you want. What's the meaning of life? And the whole 5th grade cracks up. Now, I have to admit that the first dozen times this happened, I wanted to reach out and strangle the little brat. And it finally occurred to me, after at least a dozen times, to stop and notice what just happened. Rabbi, what's the meaning of life? He thinks that's a joke. He thinks that's a stupid question. He thinks that's an unanswerable question. He thinks that's the dumbest, funniest question you can ask, even if you ask your rabbi, even if you ask it in synagogue. So the first question is it a dumb question? And I have to admit that in my existence, it's not. Now, granted, my existence is somewhat extreme because I spend a lot of time with people in crisis, but in the mortuary waiting room, that's not a dumb question. And in the oncology, the cancer ward, that's not a dumb question. And in the halls of the family court, that's not a dumb question. And I suspect in many of the circumstances that you meet people, that's not a dumb question at all. On the contrary, it's the most profound question somebody can ask. Does my life have significance? Do I matter? Do I count? Am I important to someone, to anyone? That's a profound question. So how come it is that a 5th grade kid at age 11 has learned from whom and where that that's a dumb question? Who taught him that? Now I reflect on the culture that child is rooted in. It's our culture. It's this great and wonderful, beautiful American culture, which has given us so much freedom, so many opportunities, so many choices. The genius of American civilization is to multiply human power beyond anything our ancestors could have imagined, so that we have more leisure time, more opportunities, more freedoms, more ways to express the self. But there's one thing that American civilization doesn't do, it can't do, it's not designed or built to do. American civilization can let you have whatever you want, but it doesn't know what you ought to want. It can't tell you what's worth wanting. It can't tell you what you need and whether what you want is what you really need. American civilization gives us all the means, but no sense of the ends for which those means ought to be invested. American civilization allows us more leisure time than any human beings in the history of humanity have ever had, but not the foggiest idea what to do with all those hours, how to fill all those hours with something purposeful and something important. And so, I would submit to you, my friends, that American civilization leaves the populace of this culture bereft, with a hole in the soul. Because human beings need a sense of purpose. They need a sense of what for. They need a sense of what life is for, of where to invest my hours and my resources. They need a sense of what I belong to. They need a sense of what human life is aimed at, what greater, higher purposes human life is aimed at. But American civilization fails on that count, and so it leaves us with a hole in the soul. Human beings need food and water and air and love, and they need purpose, and they need meaning, and they need an abiding sense of importance, that I matter, that I count, that I'm visible. Absent that sense of purpose, people live with this hole in their existence. And when you live in a hole in your existence, you have to fill it up with something. You have to fill it up with something. And so Americans fill up that hole in their existence with a whole variety of addictions. There's addictions to drugs, legal and illegal. There's addictions to alcohol. There's addictions to sex, both real sex and virtual sex, pornography on the internet. There's addictions to shopping and acquisition. All of these are the great addictions of American culture. In the 1950s, great psychologist Erich Fromm wrote a powerful book called The Sane Society, in which he counted up all the people in America who are addicted to something, and he said, when you have that level of addiction, it's no longer the pathology of a few. It's the pathology of the culture. It's an insane society, he said. And I would submit to you, deep down, there's a deeper American addiction. It's the addiction to fun. Let's have a good time. Let's kick back. Let's relax. Now, don't think that I'm some stuck-up, difficult, hard. No, I enjoy a good time like anybody. My friend Sally's here, and we've enjoyed some wonderful times. But look at what America invests in fun. Think for a moment about the massive cultural investment in entertainment, diversion, distraction. Think about what America invests in amusement. I'll give you a simple, stupid little story. I grew up here in LA. We had 7 channels on a television, 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13. We had a 19-inch black and white TV with no vertical hold. I got this astigmatism the old-fashioned way. Watching Huckleberry Hound, you know. But if there was nothing on, you turned off the set and went outside. In my 13th year, the Lord doth blessed us with UHF. So we got Alistair Cook from London, Masterpiece Theatre, and Tijuana bullfights. And sometimes they'd blend into each other, and I'd see Alistair with a cape and a bull. How many channels on the television now? I'll give you my testimony, brothers and sisters. For the last 25 years, we owned a 19-inch Panasonic color television set with rabbit ear antennas that I bought from one of my graduate students when he left to go study in Israel. It died 2 years ago. May it rest in peace. And my children, all 3 teenagers, came to me and they said, "Pop, you buy a new television every 25 years. You ought to buy something good." Says I, "What's good?" Says they, "Don't worry, Dad, we know." So in an act of profound faith, I give them the car keys and my credit card, and off they go to that temple of bourgeois palace, the palace of pleasure, Best Buy. My 3 kids come back 3 hours later, very happy. "Dad, you're going to love it." "What do I own?" "You're going to see, you're going to love it." 3 days later, come into my house, the 3 largest human beings I have ever seen in my life, carrying a box the size of my first apartment. And I am the proud owner of a 36-inch Sony Vega Trinitron flat screen HD TV high-def television. This thing has a remote control with enough buttons you can launch a moon rocket. Comes my dear loving son and says, Pop, when we had the old TV, it was okay to have the rabbit ears. But now that you own a fine piece of digital equipment, you need to have cable. Enter Dmitri, a wonderful immigrant from the Ukraine who hooks me up. Oh, you're going to like this. He says, for the first month, all the channels are free. Good luck. Do you know how many channels are on my television? Do you know how many channels on my television? I'll tell you how many channels on my television. There are enough channels on the television that you don't actually have to watch anything. You can spend the whole night just flipping through the channels. I mean, you got the president on one channel, you got Newt Gingrich on another channel, you got Kobe Bryant, you got Gilligan's Island in Norwegian, you got people putting on their clothes, taking off their clothes. God knows what's on my television. Unbelievable. And that's only the television. Then there came a thing called pay-per-view, which means that you can buy more. Like what they got isn't enough. If you're bored with the 547 channels of the television, you can now buy first-run movies right on the television. And then I once turned the TV to the wrong station, and there came up there a woman on my screen, whom the Lord hath blessed. Because I looked at this young woman and I said, holy. And my son said, turn it off, Dad. It's not good. You're a preacher. You're not supposed to be looking at that. I said, if I'm going to fight sin, son, I have to know sin. So he said, can I sit with you? I said, yeah, you look out for your mother. If she's coming in the room, we're turning it back to Alistair Cook. And that's just the television, right? If you move 90 degrees in our living room, we have a computer. How many websites are there? According to Google this morning, about 5.2 billion with a B. That would take you a good chunk of a lifetime to review. And of course, I have teenagers, so I have a thing. I'm not sure whether it's an Xbox or a Wii or a PlayStation, but it seems to occupy them for a great deal of time. And that's just in the house. Now, you could leave the house, and what's right outside? I was born the same year Disneyland opened. Me and Mickey are the same age. He's looking a lot better than me. How many theme parks within a day's drive of here? You know, in 1955, that was the only thing there was. Not only are there about 10 theme parks within a day's drive of here, they built another one in the parking lot of Disneyland. You know this? It's called California Adventure. I drove all the way down the 5 from Encino to take a bunch of kids from the synagogue to Disneyland. It took me 2.5 hours, and I get to the ticket window, and the lovely young woman says, would you like the California Adventure? I said, honey, I've had all the California Adventure I can stand. I want Fantasyland. Think about how much we have invested in entertainment, amusement, distraction, diversion, and I submit it's not an accident. It's an answer to the hole in the soul. You realize that television went national the same year folks stopped going to church. You can see the statistics. They're parallel. The rise of television parallels the fall of church attendance in America because people turned away from the church and turned to the TV for their stories and their myths. That's where they get their sense of importance. And this is the great disease that fills America. I'll give you a silly story. I'm a rabbi in the community, so I feel an obligation to everyone in the community. I got a call from a gentleman who says, my father passed away. Would you be available to do the funeral service? And I said, certainly, my pleasure. I want to meet with them, meet with the family. So we make an appointment to go visit their dad's house. 3 adult men, and their father lived a wonderful long life and passed away. And I sit at the table and I say to these 3 men, tell me about your dad. I want to prepare the service. Tell me about your dad. What was important to him? What were his values? What were the things that mattered? And there's a long silence. And then one of the boys, the oldest boy, says to me, well, in truth, Rabbi, Dad loved golf. Says I, golf is good. Golf is fine. Nothing wrong with a good game of golf. What were his purposes in life? What did he work for? What were his dreams in life? Well, now all 3 of them have a consensus. Oh, yeah, golf is it. Dad was deeply into golf, and now for the first moment I look around the house, and you ever see a house decorated in early Tiger Woods? You know, everything's sort of this forest green with golf trophies and golf clubs and golf equipment and golf pictures all over. And I said, one more time, I said, tell me what it was that your father wanted most for you and your brothers. Well, he always wanted to get a place on a golf course and live on a golf course. Now, it's not so hard to do a golf funeral. Some of the pastors and preachers, ministers in the room will attest to this, you know. In the Jewish faith, the number 18 means life. You know, it's chai, so you can say he played out his 18 and now he got his hole in one. I mean, you could say that, you know. It's a little crude, but it worked. But as I'm doing this funeral service and talking about the straight shots and the teamwork and the camaraderie of golf, I ask myself, is it possible that we have reached a point in the development of our civilization that an entire human life can be devoted to the playing of a game? And that's all there was to him. And that's all there was to him. The great Henry David Thoreau once lamented, he said, men today live lives of quiet desperation. I think he's wrong. Men today live days of amused distraction because there's always something else on TV or another movie or another trip or another game to play. But it's a life that's a dead end, because a life without purpose is a life with a hole in the soul, and that's what all of us here know. Where do people get a sense of meaning and significance and importance from? Well, one place is we root our personal story, our personal narrative, into a grand narrative. I tell my story as part of a greater struggle for truth or beauty or justice or faith or freedom. But in America, the grand narrative becomes very selfish. What's the grand narrative of American life? It's consuming. My teenage kids only want to go to the mall. And what does the mall tell the kid? That your worth as a person depends upon the way you look and what you dress in. Consumption replaces the search for meaning in American life. Another way that I gain a great sense of meaning and significance and purpose is in the relationships that I build, in moments of intimacy, of connection, of love, and of friendship, and of solidarity. America's a deeply lonely society. It's true we invented the World Wide Web and cell phones and fax machines and FedEx. We invented all of these technical means of being in touch with each other. But it's harder and harder and harder to be in touch with people. Somehow there is a disconnect. 3 o'clock in the afternoon when I was a kid, my mama went to the back fence, and there 5 women would meet at the back fence, and they'd decide whose house they were going to go to, and they'd all sit down and drink coffee for an hour, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, everyone's either at work or taking care of small children, which is also work, or busy in their own private space. I visited Italy a couple of years ago. It's a beautiful, wonderful place. Go to Venice and go into one of the piazzas of Venice at 6 p.m. Something amazing happens. Everybody who lives in the piazza comes into the piazza at 6 p.m. There's neighborhood life. The adults sit in the cafes and they sip coffee or they sip a little wine. The kids play soccer. The priest comes out and invites anyone in for a short service. There's a sense of neighborhood and community. I don't know my neighbors. The only time I knew my neighbors is when the earthquake came and literally all the walls fell down. But since then, we've put the walls back up and I don't know my neighbors. So at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock or 3 o'clock, there's nobody to talk to in my neighborhood. Oh, wait. There is someone you can talk to. Someone we all love talking to. There's Oprah. Oprah Winfrey is a genius. And her genius is she understands that we need connection, that we need intimacy, that we need significant conversation, but we ain't going to get it in our communities. We're not going to get it where we work. We're not going to get it where we live. We're not going to get it where we play. So she'll give it to us. So millions and millions of Americans tune into Oprah every afternoon because there's community. But it's not a real community. First of all, because it's commercial. They're trying to sell you something. And second of all, because you don't know Oprah, and neither do I. And we don't know each other for Oprah. It's not a real community. It's Americans' faux community. It's a placebo community. And there is a deep need for community in America. That's the second source of meaning. And the third source of meaning are moments. moments where we give of ourselves, moments where we are touched, moments we feel like we are part of something bigger. The American sense of self is very, very small. We got this from the English liberal tradition. We are each born into the world as an individual, and we enter into social contracts with others. But self is fundamentally the circle that ends at the tip of my nose. The problem is, in that direction lies only loneliness and emptiness and meaninglessness. Meaning only comes when I open the circle of the self to another, and I share my life with somebody else. And that is the source of significant moments. Fun, the having of fun, is a self-centered thing. But the sharing of something, that's profound. And we haven't figured out how to do that. At least a lot of folks haven't. And that's why they walk the world with this profound sense of disconnect, profound sense of sadness. And they reach a point in midlife when suddenly they discover that they've lost so much of what they cherish. They lost so much of their fun. And life reaches a crisis. It doesn't mean as much anymore. It doesn't seem to matter. I don't know how many of you counsel people in midlife. You remember that wonderful movie, American Beauty, when the Kevin Spacey character reaches that point in his life when he realizes that his marriage isn't working and his work isn't working and he has no community, and the only thing left is to lust after his daughter's cheerleading partner. And then in a moment of revelation, he realizes how silly all that is. That's what happens in an America without a sense of purpose. This, I would suggest to you, my friends, is what we are all up against. Whether you're a therapist or a clergy member, this is what we're up against. Because there is, I think, a connection, although it's a spectrum, between this profound sense of sadness and depression and powerlessness and meaninglessness all the way through middle stages of severe personality problems to the extreme pathologies of mental illness. This is what we deal with, and this is what we're up against. Now, certainly there are different roles for clergy people and therapists in dealing with this. I am not a therapist. I'm not trained as a therapist. I don't have the disciplines of a therapist. I don't have the instincts of a therapist. I don't have the time of a therapist. I can't see somebody for 10 or 15 or 20 sessions, right? I don't have that. And besides that, I want to play a different role in their life as a member of the clergy. I don't want to ask them about certain deep underlying realities of their psychological makeup. I want that to remain tucked away in the impersonal, objective, and confidential lockbox of a therapist, so that when they come to my synagogue and they seek comfort and support or celebration or learning, that they're not thinking about what I know about them. But we have to work as partners, ladies and gentlemen, to heal this society and to heal this culture and to heal the people who are its victims. We have to work as partners. I work in a very affluent community in the San Fernando Valley, and even in my community, people are afraid of therapists. They're afraid to go to a therapist. Why are they afraid to go to a therapist? First of all, because it's an admission that I'm crazy, and no one wants to admit that. And second of all, because everyone knows a horror story of someone who went to a therapist who screwed them up even worse. And third of all, because it's costly. And fourth of all, because it takes a lot of time. And fifth of all, because you're going to sit there going, That's the stereotype of therapy among so many people. My role as a clergyman is to do triage, to listen to that person's story and to diagnose roughly, and I'm not trained, so it's a rough diagnosis, what sort of help they might need, and then to make a wise referral. There are people who come into my study who are profoundly mentally ill. I have learned to recognize the difference between a person with whom I share no values and a person with whom I share no reality. And the person with whom I share no reality needs a special kind of psychiatric care and psychological care, and I can get them to that care because they trust me, because I'm their rabbi, because I'm there with them when their kids were born and when their kids grew up and when their parent died, and I'm there with them to celebrate holidays and special moments. And they trust me if I say to them, I'm making an appointment for you to see Dr. Brown or Dr. Green or Dr. Black. Sometimes they come with marital issues, and they want to talk to me about, and I can see where the disconnect is, so I refer to a marriage therapist. to a clinical social worker, to a clinical psychologist, to someone who can help this couple communicate with each other so they can find a way. And I'll check back with them to make sure they went and to see if it works. Sometimes they come to me and they're just depressed. And here, in areas of depression, I think that clergy and therapists can work together. Because what depression recognizes is that a person has obstacles to their normal access to the resources of life and the resources of meaning. And sometimes I have the capacity to speak to a broader community about living a life that matters. Something that you would dearly like to say, but you can only say it one client at a time. I get several thousand people in front of me, so I can say it. About what it means to choose a healthier life, a wholer life, a life that matters, a life of significance, a life of importance. About what do you do with a teenager, and how do you direct a teenager into a life that matters. Because teenagers need more than the mall. They need a sense of mission. They need more than the mall. They need a sense of a crusade, of doing something important in the world. They need more than the mall. They don't want more clothes. They don't want more video games. They want somebody to take them seriously and their passions and ideals to be taken seriously. And I can do that as a clergyman. We have to be partners because the society is insane and it's killing people. It's killing them spiritually, if not physically. We have to be partners because we deal with the same stuff, with the soul of people. We have to give them new myths that mean something. We have to give them the access to relationships of deep intimacy and connection, and we have to help them find sacred moments in their lives. That's our task. And we must do it together because we can't do it alone. Clergy are not trained to deal on the deep psychological levels that therapists are. And therapists, as I said, often don't have the trust and don't have the audience and don't have the words of a sacred tradition to help people find access to their myths. Now, the kid in the 5th grade, I say to him, stand up. He says, am I in trouble? I said, we'll find out. He said, you asked me what's the meaning of life? I'll tell you what the meaning of life is. He said, you can tell me the meaning of life? He said, yeah, why do you think people call me Rabbi? That's what I'm licensed to do. Let me tell you a little story. It's an old medieval Jewish story. When God created the world, God left it unfinished. So the world that you and I live in is a world of mixtures. There are pieces that are created and pieces that are still chaos. There are parts that are beautiful and parts that are still chaotic and disorderly and ugly. There's hate and there's love. There's wisdom and there's ignorance. The world is unfinished, and you, my friend, you were brought into the world to be God's hands to finish creation. That is your sacred responsibility, to find a part of the world that only you, with your aptitudes and your attitudes and your abilities, you can make whole. That's your job. And whether you choose to do it as a physician or a teacher or a healer, as an artist, as an actor, as a business person, as a teacher, however you will choose to do it, it will be your sacred responsibility to find that piece of the world's chaos and make it whole. And when you do, you'll know that your life matters. He said, really? He said, can I ask you 2 more questions, he says. I said, sure. How am I going to know the part of the world that belongs to me? Says I, it'll find you. It always does. And then he says, more humbly, and how am I going to know what to do with it when I get there? And that's the better question. And that's what your religious education is all about. That's why you got to finish the 5th grade. Because any school can get you into Yale or Stanford or Harvard or SC. But we're here to do something more. We're here to give you hands that heal. And we want to give you a sensibility that cries when you see the pain of the world. And we want to give you a sense of beauty in the world and truth. An instinct that you will not be able to shake. That's what religious education is for. So that when you leave here, you leave with a caring soul. And that's what you'll carry into the world. And that's what you'll carry into the world. But let me tell you something, my friend. Let me tell you something about that. You're going to go into the world, and let me make a prediction. You're going to meet the darkness of the world, its brokenness, its irreparability, and it's going to break your heart. And when that happens, you come back here. You know why churches and synagogues and mosques, ashrams are here? None of us pray, dear God, make the world over for us. We pray, give us the courage to go back out there and keep at it. Give us the wisdom to fix what seems so unfixable. Give us the vision to see the whole, and give us the faith to know that God is with us when we're doing this. And if you pray that prayer, my friend, God will answer that prayer. So finish the 5th grade and go make the world whole. You all, go make the world whole. Thank you. You want to do some questions, or are we done? Yeah?
We're going to do some questions.
Yeah? All right, you tell them what you want them to do.
Please have a seat. We're going to take a few minutes. The rabbi has got to leave soon, but we're going to take a few minutes of his time, and he's going to take a few questions and answers. Who has our microphones? Here's one. Who else has a microphone for us? Okay. Over here, someone else. All right, so I'm going to invite the rabbi to come back to the podium, and our roving people will take a few questions, and he'll do his best to answer them.
Okay. Any question you always wanted to ask a rabbi, this is your chance. You've heard the meaning of life question. Yes, sir.
I was wondering if you thought that schizophrenia or bipolar disorder can be the beginning of a sane response to an insane society.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question. That's a very, very, very interesting question. And there's a great deal written on that, you know, about whether certain psychopathologies are in fact appropriate adjustments to a crazy world.
We're starting to search for meaning again.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, let's first recognize that many of those diseases are rooted in chemical imbalances in the brain and are not the product of culture. But how they respond to culture and react to culture is something that we have to be very sensitive about, right? You know, you put an individual in an insane situation, they're going to behave in an appropriate manner, and sometimes people do. Sometimes the diagnosis of mental illness and the struggle to get well can initiate a process of seeking meaning, of gaining meaning in the world. The reason I'm being so hesitant is that, thank you so much, bless you. My experience is that schizophrenia is hell. It's death on earth. You know, and people who suffer with it, and it's not just death on earth for the individual, often it's even worse for the family, the loved ones, the friends, the people around them, you know, and it's such a horrible kind of issue, and puts people with such impossible choices, gives parents, loved ones, spouses, kids, impossible choices to deal with, that I tend to put it off on the side where I don't want to assign any value to it whatsoever except disease. You know, but you're right, and in a certain way, sometimes certain symptoms of mental illness can reflect an insane society. Sure. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's the best I can do. Hi.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I loved your message. I'm a patient, and I've been a peer advocate and a mentor for probably about 20 years. And I come across people that I can only describe them as evil. They're patients as well, and they're very destructive. And I'm very sensitive to depression, and many times I'm taken aback by these people that, you know, I try to help them, but they turn around and they just do nasty things. And I do pray, but how do you defend yourself against people that just seem evil?
Yeah. Boy, easy questions. Yeah, no kidding. You know, I don't have a simple answer to this. There are terribly toxic people. There are toxic personalities. They're terribly destructive people. If we had all of the resources, the time, the patience in the world, we could maybe get down to the source and root of their toxicity, whether it's rooted in a family they raised in, or delusions they live with, or some kind of chemical adjustment in the brain, if we had all of that. But none of us have that kind of time, effort, energy, patience, right? And so what you have to do is, as you said, you have to protect yourself in a certain way, and you have to know what are the limits. Now, as a clergyman, one of the things, when I first graduated as a rabbi, I was 27 years old. I was the king of the world. I could do anything. I was going to heal the world. One of the things that the last 30 years have given me is a great deal of humility. I know my limits. One of the reasons why I said I'm not a therapist is I know my limits. And I want to be able to refer people to others who have different capacities and different abilities. When I come across a person who I deem to be, as you mentioned, evil, toxic, destructive, I can try. I mean, as a person of care, I tried. What can I do to reach out? Maybe I can reach under. Reverend Murray tells this beautiful, beautiful story of reaching beyond the initial anger of the homeless man on the street and discovers a soul underneath. God bless Reverend Murray. And all of us want to try to reach out and try to reach that person. But then I also have to be acutely aware of the fact that I might not be able to reach that person. Their chaos might be so deep that I can't get to it. Their chaos might be so profound that I can't fix it. In which case, then the question of protection kicks in, and you have to know how to protect yourself. How do you protect the people around that person? How do you protect the family, children, and spouse, and those? And that becomes a real difficult issue. I do a lot of consulting. My friend Sally Weber is here, and Sally has heard her phone ring with my voice at the end of it many, many, many dozens of times saying, help, what do I do? What do I do? And I just want to say to all the clergy in the room, there is no shame in reaching out to a gifted therapist who is on your speed dial and saying, help. Right? When a father in my school committed suicide in his front yard while his kids were being driven to school, and I had to figure out how to go tell their kids that their daddy just killed himself, I called Sally. Partly because I was terrified, partly because I honestly didn't know the words to say, and partly because I was scared. It shook me, and I wanted to hear a friend. When a person comes with an impossible case of issues and I don't know where to go, I reach out. And having that network of therapists who are my partners, who are confidential, who are wise, who are giving, who will take my call when I call, who will forgive me for not knowing, that is such a gift to a clergy person. If you are a pastor, you need that. And if you are a therapist and you think you could be helpful to a pastor, offer that. Take them to lunch, and get to know them. And so that when we build a personal connection, then we can work together. And that's the partnership that I think is so critical. So I apologize, as I did to this gentleman, for being a little evasive, but that's the best the reason we're here in this room is because the things we deal with don't have easy answers. And I hope that my presentation didn't convey in any way that there are easy answers to any of the issues that we deal with. Simply that I want you to have the courage to confront them to the best of your abilities. Another question? There's no other microphone?
Yes.
Outside. Oh, this side.
I have the other one.
Please.
I would like to know if there has begun any dialogue between pastors, those of us who have mental health conditions, and the institutions, doctors and so on, regarding the role that technology is beginning to play, well, has played for a long time, but is becoming more present, more imminent.
Right.
In diagnosis, treatment. It's a very, very hard line. For example, I do a lot of research, and quite frankly, I'm frightened to death of what technology is doing,
Mm-hmm.
and what it can do, and what it is going to do.
Right.
And sometimes our need for help and for answers,
Mm-hmm.
they can push us to a place where we do not use discernment, neither the person who
Right.
has a condition nor those around us who are there to assist us.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like your
Let me say something. I was going to speak about this earlier, and I want to make mention of this. The synagogue where I work in, it's a very large suburban synagogue. We have an in-house counseling center. 30 years ago, my predecessor, my mentor, Rabbi Harold Schulweis, gathered a group of therapists and said he wanted help in dealing with the issues of the members of the community that he felt were beyond his capacity. And what that group of people did was they formed a group, and they recruited a class of volunteers, paraprofessionals, went through a very rigorous 2-year training course. It was parallel to any good master's program in the community, and graduated one class and then essentially a second class and a third class. And we have an in-house counseling center that offers low-cost counseling by professionals and paraprofessionals. What happened over the ensuing 30 years is that many of the paraprofessionals went off and got credentialed, right? They originally were mommies who were giving a few hours of their free time. Now they're grandmas with PhDs. And now we have an in-house. Now what that allows us to do, in addition to be able to refer literally downstairs, and it's open to Jewish people and non-Jewish people, it's open to anybody in the community, and we refer frequently to those people, and we consult with them. So there is in my community, in my synagogue, an ongoing dialogue between rabbis, clergy, and therapists about the kinds of issues we're seeing, about the kinds of problems we're facing, about how we can help each other and partner with each other. Right? I was a cancer patient, and I needed support, and my family needed support. So I went downstairs to the counseling center, and I said, I'd like you to start a cancer support group. They'd never done that before. They recruited a health psychologist from the community who started, in cooperation with the wellness community, 2 cancer support groups in the synagogue. It was a wonderful gift to the community. And similarly, we consult on all sorts of issues. Consult on issues of drug abuse, we consult on issues of divorce, all of the many issues that you deal with, we deal with sort of on an in-house as a conversation between therapists and rabbis, and that's very helpful. Now, if anyone would like information about how you do that, how you set up such a center, I've left some brochures, and you're welcome to call the VBS Counseling Center, and they'd be very glad to give you information about how you might go about setting something up, or in cooperation with a group of churches or a group of synagogues, group of institutions setting that up. Now, in terms of the question that you mentioned in terms of technology, whether it's technology and its impact on life, or whether it's technology and its uses in therapy, right? These are things that we've talked about. I mean, I'm dealing with a generation of children who are glued to cell phones. And how does that change their social interactions? There's a thing called Twitter, right? There was a contest, by the way, national contest. What would God Twitter? You know? So, yeah, I'm getting tired of you, I think was one of the, you know. But you know, it's a very interesting question about how this has impacted life, how this has impacted, how it's impacted family life. What happens when instead of the family living room, you now have workstations in a family home where everyone's staring at their own screen? What happens when virtual community replaces actual community? When virtual communication replaces actual communication? When we are no longer the people we are, but we're the avatars that we create. Is that the word? You know? Avatar? Avatar? It sounds like a headache remedy. 2 Avatar, you'll feel much better. So these are things, this is the kind of conversation, if you are a therapist and you are close to a pastor, a rabbi, a minister, a priest, an imam, call them up, take them to lunch and talk about this. We would love to talk about that. Compared to the stuff I usually get to talk about, like fundraising and budget problems, you know, this would be it would be a miracle. Right? So this would make a wonderful conversation and a wonderful conference on a small scale among families and it'd be wonderful to talk to families about this. Do you ever turn the machines off? In the Jewish faith, on Friday night, you're supposed to turn all the electronics in the house off. You know what that takes? Right? I took a group of 40 families away on a family retreat to a campground. See, it's ringing already. See? We spent 24 hours without electronic media. And I said to these parents, how does it feel? He says, it's really weird. Like, we really talk to each other. Like, my kid is a nice kid. Yeah, I thought so too, you know. I mean, you know, you get a technology diet. You get a fast. They call it a technology fast. Can you live without your BlackBerry, without your cell phone, without your email, without your fax machine, without your television, without your telephone? Amazing experience. Very hard experience. So let me get someone else have another question, because we're going to have to go in a minute. Yeah, we are. Okay, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, normally, of course, we know that the first people that mentally ill patients or family members with mentally ill children visit are the clergy.
Sometimes.
How do you deal, or how do you persuade the families? What strategies do you use to persuade them that it's not necessarily demonic possession? And how do you deal with that stigma about the issue regarding spirituality and also the mental illness and some of the other areas that need to be?
I think that's a very, very important question. When families come to see me, they're usually desperate. There's a sense of desperation. Mom is acting in a certain way, dad is acting in a certain way, the kid is acting in a certain way, and we don't know what to do. We are at our wits' end. What do we do? And when I suggest to them, first I listen. I do what you do. I listen very carefully. I let them tell their story. And by telling their story already, it begins to put it into some shape. The narrative gives it some structure, and it begins to give them the sense that they can take care of it. And I'll ask pointed questions so I really get a sense of the story of what the situation is. And then when I suggest to them that there are professionals in the community who can help you, who know how to deal with this, who have dealt with situations like this and have been successful in bringing people back to the land of the living, or bringing people back to a communication, to a connection, bringing back to a sense of shared reality and shared values, when I suggest that, there's often this tremendous sigh of relief. There are? And when I give them names and say, here's what I want you to do, and sometimes I'll pick up the phone and make the appointment. I'll call them. I'll call my friend who's the therapist and say, listen, I have a family here. Here's the situation. Can you see them today? And my therapist friends, the guys I refer to, the people I refer to, they know my tone of voice. And when I say, can you see them today? That's code for, you're going to see them today. And often they'll say, sure, send them right over, or yes, I can see them at 5, or I can't see them today, but I can see them tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. And the idea that there is a professional that I have a connection with, and I'm not going to let go of them. I'm going to check up on them. I'm going to be part of the therapeutic process to the extent that I'm allowed to be part of the process without violating confidentialities. The fact that I'm the one that sent them opens a door, and they're always very, very grateful for that. Very, very, very grateful for that. Demonic possession isn't the issue in my community. Shame is the issue in my community. That my child has a drug problem means I'm a bad parent and I broke the kid. Right? That my spouse and I can't get along means I'm a bad husband or a bad wife and I broke the relationship. Or sometimes it's with a lot of anger. She broke the relationship. Right? It's those kind of emotions that get in the way of people seeking help. You know, I'm not the one who needs help, Rabbi. She's the one who needs help. Okay. Tell me about that. And again, by talking and I know what you know. I talk and talk and talk. Let them talk. Let them talk. The more you allow the narrative to take shape, the more there is a sense of power over the circumstance. Just the process of letting them tell the story gives shape to the process and opens a door for the introduction of another individual who can take them down the road of a therapeutic process. And I find that profoundly they're very grateful, and I get wonderful calls from people, thank you for referring me to so-and-so. Now that doesn't always work. Sometimes it doesn't work. You know, I have, like all the pastors and priests and ministers in the room, I have had occasion where I had said to a couple, I really think you guys need some help. And they stood up and told me to go someplace, stormed out of the office. I would get a call. I did this to a couple that was getting married, and they were sitting in front of me behaving in a manner that was very inconsistent with a couple that should be married. So I said, I think you guys have some stuff to work out, right? I got a call from her father. What do you mean my daughter's, you know? I said, let me tell you that what I saw. And when I described it, he said, oh, yeah, we saw that too. We just thought that was normal pre-wedding jitters. Flying objects are not normal pre-wedding jitters. Broken bones, So a third of the time they accept my recommendation and go quietly to the therapist and have a great result. A third of the time they slam the door on the way out, call me horrible names and never speak to me again. And a third of the time they slam the door on the way out, promise never to speak to me again, call me 2 hours later and say, you know what, Rabbi, we sat in the car in the parking lot screaming at each other for 2 hours. Maybe you were right. Maybe we do have some issues. Could you give us the name of those people again? You know what? If 2/3 of the time I can get people to a good therapist and get a good result, that will make me the world's batting champion. And that's, I think, that's not a bad result. But coming to me as someone they trust, and if I get them to tell the story and introduce the notion of a caring professional, it's a gift. And it's often accepted with that kind of gratitude. Want to do one more question and we get out of here? Is that enough? Okay, well, thank you all. Be good.